Hey guys, so of course Legacy of Destruction is right around the corner, and one of the more anticipated archetypes is Tenpai Dragons, which is going to be a meta-relevant archetype very soon. And so what I thought I'd do is go through a lot of the OCG topping tournament lists and just sort of do a breakdown of, some of the key ratios, most common played cards, and etc. I understand that OCG format is different. They also have, a different ban list and everything, but at the same time, I think a lot of the components of this breakdown will still carry over to TCG as well and help us sort of prepare for this deck in terms of whether you're playing it and you're trying to build an optimal list, or maybe you're trying to have a better understanding to go against it. And definitely a big shout out to YGOProduct.com and Renren for really keeping track of the OCG level events as well, on top of all the TCG related stuff. Really an insane amount of hard work that they're putting into, and definitely go check out their website. One final note is, of course, Legacy of Destruction pre-orders for singles should be up very soon on Card Brawlers as well as Tier 0 games. I'll make a community post on it, but if it does come out, definitely use my code Hakuna5 for 5% off on those pre-orders. Okay, so let's just start this off and let's just look at the deck size for Tenpai Dragon list. And so this was based on 34 OCG lists from those that topped in those various level tournaments, and I also included just the tournaments in the last month. Anyways, among those 34 lists, most of them were playing at 40, but not a vast majority of them. But at the same time, this might potentially have something to do with, more so OCG related factors in terms of maybe they like to play outside of 40. I actually don't know. I haven't done any kind of OCG trends analysis at all at this point, but just some thoughts in terms of, deck size can potentially be useful in terms of, for example, you are allowed to ask your opponent at tournaments, what's the count for their main deck size, and if it's like, let's say, well over 40, a lot of times you can assume something like branded, for example. With Tenpai, I guess it's a little bit harder to assess whether they're on that or not. Now, in terms of the most common ratio of the actual Tenpai Dragon cards, so this is kind of what you see, really, the white one and the red one. I don't actually know if this is like the TCG name or the OCG name, but nonetheless, the white and red, they were all of the lists were playing this at 3. I think that's very standard at this point. The green one, though, mostly played at 2, 80% of the time. Some were playing just at 1, some were playing even at 3, and I guess this is because this is the one that, on its own, it's not going to, add or special summon from the deck like the white or red one can. It's special summons for the gray, so you kind of need like the other Tenpai stuff going, I suppose. Now, as for the extra deck Tenpai Dragon monsters, looks like for the Biden Dragon, most of the lists were just playing it at 2, and with a couple lists playing at 3, and then the bigger, the Transcendent one, looks like actually, most were just playing at 180%, but, there were several lists that were playing it at the very least 2. Okay, so to provide an overview of the hand traps for Tenpai Dragons in terms of kind of like the number of hand traps that they're typically playing. So this, they can play a lot. So it range from 8 to 26 in the main deck with a median of 19 hand traps in the main, with only one list playing fewer than 10 hand traps. So, this is absolutely absurd. So to put it into context, I've been doing this kind of breakdown for a while, but, just looking at the past year, at least up until, December, because I did this as an end of the year video, we were really trending towards around 9 hand traps in the main deck. The most recent breakdown I did was about a month and a half ago, whatever YCS it was, and so at that point we were at 14, which is still absurdly high, right? But this deck can play a lot of hand traps clearly, and it's not really, I don't think, an OCG factor either. It just shows that this deck has a very small core and it can fit a lot of non-engine space. So, and looking at the side deck, at least in the hand traps counts, was a median number of 4 for the side. And if you look at board breakers instead, a median of 5 in the main, with only 2 lists playing more than 10 board breakers in the main deck. So really, at least in the OCG, it looks like they're sort of focusing more on the hand traps rather than focusing on a lot of board breakers, which, don't get me wrong, when you're going second, yes, board breakers are probably maybe more efficient and better. At the same time, when a lot of the decks, a lot of people are playing Tenpai and they all want to go second, at some point you're going to lose that roll, and game 1 you're going to have to be forced to go first. And in those instances, hand traps are of course a lot more flexible because they can be used going first or going second. So I think that's why they're sort of leaning towards that way, and I don't think that'll be really that much different for TCG as well. I think the thinking will probably be similar, and in the side, a median number of 6 board breakers. Now, in terms of some of the more other common extra deck monsters that are not Tenpai related, so of course the first one we're going to start with is Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres. So this is something that they seem like they go into if they're forced to go first, because it's just 2 dragons. They can also get to bounce, and we'll also talk about a little bit later in terms of what this can potentially summon. We also have Trident Dragon, which was seen in also all of the lists, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because of course at this point it's like $100 and trending up. So no, my friends will not let me borrow this card, Jerome, so I'm going to need a little bit more advice here. But all jokes aside, it is unfortunately pretty expensive. Technically, I don't think you actually absolutely need to have it, but it does allow for like, you know, your Omega OTKs, as my friend Adam would put it, because this does get pretty beefy, especially with the field spell. And then you have like Black Rose Dragon. I think that's kind of cool in the battle phase where it just kind of like just nukes everything on board, but it wasn't seen in every list. Then we also have Fire Charmer, because, you know, they're also fire, Year of the Fire, I guess. They really like that attribute lately. And then we also have something like Ruddy Rose Dragon, which is, I guess, able to banish like all from the grave as well. Now, some other extra deck monsters I wanted to highlight that I think are interesting but not seen in every list. Odd-Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon. This one's not new. I think a lot of people have already talked about and discussed this already in regards to Tenpai Dragons. Although at the same time, it was a little bit surprising that it actually was not seen in every list. Again, it's OCG. Maybe it'll be a little bit different for TCG, but perhaps it's not actually a given that you're going to play this. But it does allow for some form of protection in a way where, you know, your opponent cannot activate monster effects in the battle phase. Now, back in my day, this used to play it in Pendulum Magicians, and you would actually summon Amorphage Sloth from the scale, and then, you know, your opponent just locked out of special summoning from the extra deck. But unfortunately, that part of the effect I don't think is really relevant anymore. It's more so for that battle phase protection effect. And then, of course, you also have Samurai Destroyer. I think this is another thing that's been talked about recently. It seems like it's meant more for the matchup against Yubel, so that they don't just like kind of keep floating as you kind of attack over them, or if you can even attack over them, really. It wasn't seen in a lot of lists, but I think perhaps something to explore. And then you have Cyber's Quantum Dragon, which actually coincidentally was another card that kind of saw some play in Pendulum Magicians back in 2019. Essentially, you know, if you have a Link monster, your opponent can only target this one. They can also only target this one for attacks as well, and if you do attack it, it does get bounced, and if this is the one attacking, then it actually gets attack as well. So I think it's kind of cool. Not really seen in a lot of the lists, but maybe it's another tech option if your extra deck is flexible. So next, let's cover the most common hand traps as well as staples seen in these lists. Again, of course, it is the OCG. There's going to be some hand traps that will be legal, that's not legal for us, and etc. But let's just kind of go through them. So for example, you know, Maxi, I'm not even going to bother talking about this. We don't have this in the TCG, thank goodness, but they do, so they have to deal with it. Imperm, seen in a lot of lists. I'm not going to provide too much commentary in terms of, because I don't actually really know what the OCG format is in detail, but really, Imperm and Ash, you're going to be seeing that anyways in pretty much any format, so not too surprising there. Nibiru, I think, especially for us now with Baron and Savage being banned, of course, I think Nibiru is going to be pretty strong. Not great against some decks, sure, but I think especially right now, if people are experimenting with, you know, like the Protos or Colossus line, I do think a lot of times they can play into Nibiru harder, in which case, maybe at the beginning of the format, for us at least, we might see that. Next, we have Shifter, which I think is very interesting because not every list, at least in the OCG, they were playing Shifters. So, of course, who knows if that's going to be the case for the TCG. Another thing is that it wasn't like a dominant choice in terms of main decking it either. Kind of somewhat even split in terms of main or side. Of course, it really depends on the format, so this is where it's going to be perhaps a little different for TCG, at least at the time whenever Tenpai Dragon becomes meta. The other thing is, you know, we do have Shifter at 3, OCG has it at 2, but they're still playing it, of course, this frequently. I'm a little concerned that we still have this card legal. I think, of course, if they are forced to go first, if they can play Shifter, they probably survive, and then just OTK you. Apparently, they can OTK under Shifter anyway, so I think that's a little bit alarming, but just something to keep an eye out for. And then you have Veiler, pretty standard really. Phantasme, we haven't really seen much play of this. At some point during last fall YC's Vancouver time, with like Unchained and Dragon Link being very meta relevant, that's where we saw probably the most play of Phantasme in what we have seen in the last little while, but lately not too much for us. Magma, honestly, I thought this would actually see more play and also more main deck play, because essentially it just searches whatever dragon as well, which is, I think, is going to be something that's very useful as well for us here. Ghost Ogre, this is something that we haven't seen in our format for quite some time, but something that we may see soon as well, just because of that Tenpai Dragon field spell that we want to just kind of blow up with Ghost Ogre. And then you also have something like Ghost Spell as well, which kind of phases in and out for us as well. And then in terms of most common side deck staples, of course, again, there's going to be a lot of cards here that are not relevant for us because it is banned for us. I mean, for one, Feather Duster, of course, we still have it. I mean, they're going second deck. They're going to want some back row removal. Feather Duster is going to be a common one. Droplet is also pretty nice as well. I don't know, moving into this format, I mean, for example, again, we lost Savage and something like Baron, which is nice. But I guess Appaloosa is still around, so maybe Droplet is still relevant for us. Red Reboot, unfortunately, we do not have this in the TCG, so I do miss it. I definitely miss double Red Rebooting through like a Solemn Judgment. You know, that was definitely a time to be alive. And then you have Cosmic Cyclone, so, you know, I think this is still pretty good for us too. Of course, Anti-Spell is at least limited now with the new ban list, which is nice because that's where Cosmic was really the most important for, I think. Summon Limit's also gone, but we still have a lot of stun decks in the format, and if you watched my breakdown video of like some of the stun decks that were topping lately, they actually weren't playing that much of Anti-Spell and Summon Limit to begin with, which is a little concerning. So there's still a lot of Floodgates and also Rooting Fountain to deal with. So Cosmic, gonna be good for us. We don't have Heavy Storm. Maybe it actually comes back at some point, but unfortunately, that doesn't work for us, and neither does Kaiser Colosseum. We also don't have that for us. Lightning Storm, really, you're just kind of looking at a lot of just general board wipe removal. Heat Wave, this one's interesting though, because only about, you know, essentially a little less than, or rather a little more than a third were playing Heat Wave, which is like a pretty popular going first option in case they're forced to go first. And Heat Wave, you play that, you're probably just gonna win because now your opponent just can't really stop that unless they're playing like Psy-Frame Delta, I guess, and they just kind of get OTK the next turn. So I'm not actually sure how often this is gonna see play in the TCG, but I can only assume it, at least at the beginning, as people kind of explore Tenpai, it will probably be pretty popular and you have to account for it. And then you have something like Thrust and Talent as well, really strong going second options. And also there was they were playing like Change of Heart as well, and also Rivalry Warlord was also pretty popular in the Tenpai list as well. And lastly, final kind of like tech choice. Not really a tech, I don't think, because this is actually not new in terms of this Drago card, because we actually saw this during a couple years ago when Dragon Link was tier 1. They would summon this off of Hermetic Seal, and then neither player can special summon light or dark monsters. And now keeping in mind, when you summon off of seals, their stats become 0/0, but at the same time, the reason why this monsters being summoned is probably because you force that battle phase to try to get into the seal, and they'll bounce it in the battle phase, summon this, and then now you're main phase 2, you can't really attack over this anymore, and you kind of get stuck. So that's where it can be pretty strong. So, you know, when you are forced to go first, I could guess this is one of the options that they're playing. Alright guys, so that was it for the breakdown of Tenpai Dragons based on OCG deck lists and tournaments and trends. So hopefully that was still helpful for those of us in the TCG in terms of helping to prepare to build this deck, but also to combat against it as we enter this new Legacy of Destruction format with Tenpai Dragons entering the mix. Definitely let me know in the comments if it was helpful. I'd love to do more of these with newer archetypes as we move along the line. Anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and sponsors for the continued support as usual, and well, take care guys.